And once you gave up that idea and that uniqueness specifically for short-term marketability, you lost your very competitive advantage, which was your actual identity as an industry.
Now, everybody.
When I first started doing videos, I did it out of good faith. I had a very different way of looking at things, and it was fun and I wanted to share. But now it's more about being able to complain, being able to criticize, and being able to make objections to things that I find repugnant, stupid, and useless. But in a nice, caring way, I guess. So as a lot of you know, I've been involved in that Justin Baldoni thing, or more so that the Justin Baldoni thing got involved in my issues with Wolverine, X-Men, Ryan Reynolds, and the conversations I've been having with Marvel and Disney. Now, I'm a person who has a mind for fairness. And one of the things I've noticed for everyone kind of working these days is that fairness is not doubled. It's not consistent. And that's one of the things I notice, especially with people who've advocated for, I don't know if it was ever about fair representation. It was about a representation of reality and being able to accurately represent reality without the stigma and bias of, I guess, a mindless power structure. But that mindless power structure just adopted the same stance and created content from it, and not realizing that it was the ethics of the situation that made it compelling. And that once you market on those ethics and they become vain, they become meaningless fundamentally. And so a lot of political strategy has always been around it. This is the natural cycle of every political and well, I guess not. Well, it's not philosophical. I guess it's the marketing cycle of political entertainment and that relationship between politics and art. And so I've been observing that cycle, and it's agnostic to your framework, but you take a concept or pushing back against a concept, and then you market it. You turn it into a factory, and then it loses its life, loses what makes it whole, the spark, the reality to it. And that's exactly what has happened with any ideology. So I find it, like I said, completely framework agnostic, and that's not a political stance. That's just a observation of reality. And so for what was always important to me is that there's certain things that are worth respecting. Certain things in life that are worth honoring. And as a filmmaker and as an artist, you have to understand what is worth remembering and respecting, because your role in society is the curation of such things. And I watch old films and I can see the curation of specific memories. And so it acted much like a second brain for a lot of people, especially when it came to passing on understanding from previous generations and how that worked and how it went into the next generation. And so in a lot of ways, we've had, for a while now, an inability to transfer that information. And I think a lot of that might be because how content's not been directed directly, say, to an American audience, like in the past when there's a lot of prominence of Vietnam, or, I don't know if that's necessarily the case because you're looking at the international market. But I think that's a silly mistake, because the international market was what actually was obsessed with that as a concept. And once you gave up that idea and that uniqueness specifically for short-term marketability, you lost your very competitive advantage, which was your actual identity as an industry. I think that's really kind of the core of what's going on right now. You can layer whatever kind of dynamics you want on it, but I think that's just, you're just adding to it. When it comes down to it, there's always a sense of identity that's always complicated and always in flux and always going through those complexities, unless you really kind of hit the zeitgeist and come to understand it, then you're not going to be making films, and you're not going to be developing art that really has that same cultural composition. It's not as compelling as it once was. And that compulsion of media and cinema is what created, well, really the 20th century and the identity of the 20th century, since the advent of film, the advent of the digital representation of reality. And so we've expanded that into video games, virtual reality, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes down to it, it's that same kind of thinking. You look at existing video game applications that have actually been able to break into that zeitgeist. And I do still think that cinema has a place within that zeitgeist, even in the context of artificial intelligence, because that's another complex and long-winded conversation about the role of artificial intelligence in the modern cinema and, well, modern media entertainment in general. But, it always comes down to the same thing. And the source of the authenticity is equally as important as the actual creation itself, because it's reputation-based. Authenticity is reputation-based. Heard a really sad story about a man who is L'Oreal's press secretary. His name is Honore Andre. I'm not sure to pronounce that. I haven't heard it really spoken very often. But he was basically L'Oreal, a rebel leader in Manitoba. He was his secretary, and he died at 90 after he was evicted from his apartment. And New York, they disposed of his lifelong work of preserving knowledge of the Métis people and everything like that. And he died a month later after being evicted. And that was one of the most crucial, important historical, really, document archive for the Métis people. And so in some ways, it's like, not to the same extent, but in a micro scale, the Library of Alexandria, but it was callously tossed aside without understanding. And that's what I mean, is there's a specific and minute way to comb reality for nuggets of understanding about the world, and it's understanding those small moments and those interconnected pearls of reality that actually create something compelling. And that's what I've come to deal with. And it's an ironic circumstance where this knowledge and capacity, I've gotten back into filmmaking, I've gotten back into developing things. So I've got something coming up, and I'm doing Kriegmesser, but I'm a little behind because I'm just setting up a new studio. But it's weird now to be back into the kind of the praxis of this theoretical perspective. But it's weird to think about how fixated people are on the public relations aspect of these things, because it's kind of a stupid misnomer, because it's really cheating. And it's not, and you cheat yourself as well, because you can rely on numbers, public relation reach, but without that, there's nothing really enduring from it. And the only way you could maintain homogeny is to suppress better content, intelligence, and depth. And there's many ways to communicate that. Like, there's a lot of people who are not very astute trying to make decisions about things they don't frankly understand. And that is usually where things go wrong. And that's kind of the irony of the situation, is the lack of penetrative wisdom understanding, because the people that are making decisions foolishly without understanding are very resistant to someone doing a better job than them, because frankly, it makes them look like idiots. And generally speaking, people of fragile temperaments do not like being made fools of. Seems to be a consistent thing in history as it is. But the reality is that fools, if they wise up, eventually realize that they need to collaborate with people who actually understand, who have penetrative wisdom and understanding. And trying to shoehorn yourself into a situation will never give you what you want, because even some of the greatest actors that are legends today worked because they're with the most brilliant directors. And a lot of that brilliance isn't to the same kind of level now, because I don't think there's as much freedom of thought, because of course it's a different studio system. But now we're emerging into kind of a new space where I think a lot of that, I would like to say that 70s freedom in filmmaking and that kind of early development of concepts and art is at a point where it can emerge again. Because again, I can sit here with a decent camera, I can talk to you, and with artificial intelligence and in the context of visual effects and the death, God-given death of the virtual effects industry. Death may be premature, but it's definitely a moratorium, because for the longest time, it was always a technological driven industry. And it wasn't about, picking up Saint Leclerc or Jean Godard and just like going out and like shooting something and being able to just do that. Well, AI in some ways is the eclair of today, because you don't need those connections. You don't need those budgets. It'd be nice to have them because it creates authenticity, and that development, authenticity and performance, and how you make the movie is just as much the movie itself, and the story of making it is so big part of it that has to be documented. And so some ways, filmmakers, I guess, themselves in the world of content creators, and this is a question I'm looking for, filmmakers in the time of content creators are becoming more documentarians, because film itself in the world of AI needs to be documented. The process needs to be documented. And how you document your creation of film is just as important as what you create yourself in the end. And so that's how there's that line between content creator and filmmakers that I was looking at. Let me try that one more time, just so I can do it for the real. Filmmakers are changing. They're not content creators, they're not documentarians, but there's something in between, because artificial intelligence is fundamentally altering the balance of power in filmmaking. It is a moratorium on the visual effects industry that has dominated cinema for so long and has basically allowed people to control the understanding and the direction of film because of the absolute technological limitations that were placed on people. Those technological limitations, whether it's cameras, whether it's visual effects, are no longer in place. And so what you will see in the future, because people are content hungry, they want cinema, they want things to be developed, you will see people creating very interesting works outside of existing systems, with existing systems looking to purchase into it, looking to bring people into the fold, because they have insulated themselves with fundamentally untalented people who have defended themselves through public relations. And that's what it comes down to, is that a lot of people are in this situation because of the nature of technology, because of the nature of social media, because of the nature of marketing, and they don't actually deserve to be there. And there's a ton of people on the outside, a ton of mavericks who can do something, who can change cinema culture, who can revitalize it. But the reality is they're the ones holding against it. These are the people holding it back because they're holding on by a thread. They've spent their entire lives making deals, making relationships, and now suddenly none of that really matters. And they will see it whittle away bit by bit by bit with the internet, because a lot of times that's just not sustainable to live a life of sucking up and being a tool. It drives you crazy because you have no self-respect. You have to self-soothe. You have to do a bunch of other crazy things to make yourself feel better. And obviously you do stupid things like that. And you know what? With an internet age, that catches up with you. There's no way around it. It's just how it works. If you have the self-discipline, the vision and understanding of a true artist and a true creative, you don't need those things because you're already self-satisfied with the development. You are into the development of your art, not all the things that come with it. Those things in a lot of ways are burdens to you that you have to navigate. And that's a different circumstance. It's one thing to understand the game, or the game of filmmaking and how it changed in modern times, but another to understand that if you love that game itself, then you're probably not very good at the actual thing it's producing, because the game is a secondary thing. It's a secondary structure that's implemented onto the creative process. It is not the creative process itself. And again, it's the Peter principle, because in filmmaking, the game is a secondary structure, and not everyone who's good at the game is actually good at filmmaking. And that's exactly it. It's being promoted to your level of incompetence. And a lot of times with marketing, it means you're promoted to your level of incompetence because you've had the PR to push you to be good at the game. But when it comes to actual doing the creative stuff, you're actually incompetent. And there's no cure for that except introspection, except taking the time to figure things out and get to that level. But a lot of people are promoted beyond their ability because of marketing, because of social media, and everything that they've done behind the scenes. And that is why art is, I wouldn't say in a crisis, but it doesn't live up to its full potential. And humanity as a creative force is not living up to its full potential in the stories we tell. And a lot of that is structural, but a lot of structural issues can be met with self-reflection and self-discipline. And that's what people kind of mistake in this time of Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, all this negativity and villainy, that internal stoicism is precisely what creates meaning, because you have to have something good enough to hold a line. If you never have anything that's worth fighting for, then you're just running around. You have no meaning, no purpose. You're completely disconnected. And none of what you do is rooted. And it's fundamentally just being on a treadmill, oftentimes a hedonistic treadmill, where what you do really doesn't matter. And it doesn't echo to humanity. It's impermanent. Well, all things are impermanent, but it's spiritually impermanent. And you don't cast anything of meaning out into oblivion, into eternity. And I'm a believer that every cycle, everything you do in humanity and the development of telecommunications, of technology, and as we move into the future, that every echo we make echoes into a great distance. And that exists as a point of immortality, but immortality of humanity exists in a certain kind of development, and that's that creative understanding and creative force. And that's been the consistent thing with art. And so when you see yourself as an artist, you see yourself as connected to that creative force. And you're an agent of that creative force, pushing it forward. And if you act as anything less, then you're not an artist. You're a con artist. Well, that's all my complaining for today. Thank you for seeing me. Once again, I'm Brett Douglas McDowell, and I would deeply, deeply appreciate it if you would look deep into my eyes and then like and subscribe.
Go!